Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, and hopefully your week's going good, and if it's not, well, we're all here for each other. So, definitely pull up a stump with me, and we can get into these pretty crazy and scary stories. So, yeah, thank you for watching. So, last Christmas, I was driving to my girlfriend's house 6 hours away. We decided to leave at midnight so we can surprise the family. So, me, my girlfriend, and her sister's BF is also in the car. We're driving along at about 3 a.m. Everyone else is asleep except for me, and this is the middle of rural Texas. There's no towns or anything of any interest for miles. But then, I see a car on the side of the road with its hazard lights on. I decide to call the cops just in case somebody needs help. Right about as I pull out my phone, I see a guy walking down the side of the road. I start slowing down to see if he needs help. I'm getting closer, and I see that this dude is actually really tall, like 7 feet tall. I start to feel a little off. The whole vibe has changed and everything just feels weird. I wake everyone up just to help calm my nerves. I'm getting closer, and then I realize that whatever this is now walking on all fours. It looks like almost a skinny ape or a skinny gorilla. I can't really tell. My girlfriend yells at me to just keep going and call the police, and I agree, I'm definitely gonna do that, but I want to get a better look at this thing. I just can't help it. I slow down to about 5 miles per hour and I'm about to pass by it. All of us look over and realize that the face looks human. It turns over to look at this, but it's really weird looking. It's really off. It's like a face stretched over something else's body. It's almost iRobot looking. All of us scream and I slam my foot on the gas. This thing whips its arm around. That arm had to be like 5 feet long. I don't even know. I was too scared. It clipped the back of the car, but we managed to speed out of there. And I look in my mirror and I see it running toward us. We lose him very quickly, but the girls in the car are crying, and me and the other guy are both just freaking out. We finally call the cops and tell them what happened. They said they'd go check it out, but I never found out what happened with that. It still scares me when I think about it. I take a completely different route to get there now, even though it's a bit longer, just to avoid that damn stretch of road. I really wish the cops had gotten back to me after they went there, or like if they figured out what happened. So this one night, I was driving down some back roads with my friend, and we're having a pretty good time and stuff. But then he says that he has to go to the bathroom, so he asks if I can pull up somewheres. I eventually find a gas station out in the middle of nowhere. My friend rushes into the gas station because he apparently really had to go. I stay out in the small lot right next to the station. I start just looking at my phone, scrolling through some stuff. I flick a lighter a few times just to pass the time. Then I see movement out of the corner of my eye. I snap to attention to it. I don't see anything but blackness. The hair on my neck stands on end. And I think, I hope my friend will hurry the hell up and go to the bathroom so we can go. I look in my rearview mirror. I see my friend. And I think, oh, finally. I look at him closer as he's walking toward the car. His face doesn't seem normal. Something's wrong. It's very uncanny valley. He gets in the car and is completely silent. I'm getting kind of worried now. I suddenly get a text. I flinch and jump in my seat. It's my friend that just texted me. He's asking if I want anything from the store. And I'm thinking, whoever's in my car is not my friend. What the hell? I announce that I have to go to the bathroom, so I get out of the car slowly and shut the door, and then I sprint toward the doors of the gas station. I ran up to my friend who was just browsing the gum. I explained that there is somebody in our car as I panic. He drops whatever he's carrying and we run outside. There's nobody in my car, but the passenger side door is open. We slide into my car and we just peel out of the parking lot. I haven't gone back to that place since, and nothing like this has ever happened before or after. This was my first and only spooky experience. When I was about 20, so basically a year ago, I was trying to find a new apartment or something to move in near my new school, and I couldn't find anything. I eventually settled for an ad that I saw. It was an old run-down looking place, and the dude was trying to find somebody to buy it. I tell him that I don't want to buy it, I'll rent it, and he wants to put me on this insane lease. I tell him that I'll sign a 6-month lease and not a day longer than that. He eventually gives in, so I sign it, get moved in, and surprisingly it's cheap AF, no biggie. I guess nobody had lived there in a while because the place had no electricity or internet or anything. So I get on the phones and start trying to get the basics hooked up to my new house, but it will take a while. I buy some candles and a book to keep myself busy until I have my computer and stuff. I have my phone playing music on this coffee table around 2 a.m. and I'm reading on the couch. So it's obviously fairly dark in the room. All I can see is around me and a little bit of the kitchen. The bedroom and the bathroom are totally out of sight. One window next to the front door, one in the bedroom, one in the bathroom, and one on the door that leads out to the back, near the washer and dryer. I start hearing rustling in the bushes outside the front door. I figure it must be a raccoon or something. I just moved in and I never thought to ask if they had any pests. I think nothing of it, so I go back to reading. But I keep hearing the rustling. It's starting to get really annoying, and the paranoia is starting to bother me. I don't think I locked the door. I get up and press the button on the knob to lock it. I sit back down and start reading again. I start hearing this sort of scratching at the door. All the while the bushes are outside the window and are going crazy. And I think, what is going on? This is my first night. All the blood sinks out of my chest when I realize that I hadn't locked the door in the back or the windows in the other rooms. I pick up the candle like I'm in the 1800s and start creeping to the back. All the while, a slow rumble and noise is coming from the front door. I lock the back door. I go into my room. There's nothing in there but my mattress on the floor. I lock the window. On my way to lock the window in the bathroom, when I realize the sound has stopped, and I realize that my bathroom door is shut. I didn't think I shut it, but I try and open it. I almost scream when I realize that it's locked from the inside. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind. I feel the overwhelming urge to call somebody, my parents, my friend who lives in town, anyone. My phone is on 3%. I dial up my friend just as fast as I can. No answer. I start to hear the weird dog-like noises coming from the bathroom. I've had enough. I hastily blow the candle out and drop it. I dash for the door. I fumble along the wall for a second before flinging the door open, just as the sounds from the bathroom start to escalate more. I run out into the street and keep running until I get to the school's library, which is about a mile away. I go to the top floor and I wait there till morning. I come back and the bathroom is trashed and there's weird stuff everywhere. Not dirt and not mud. I'm not sure what it is. It's black and sticky. I call the landlord and he won't comment on any of it. So just before I begin, I'd like to say that there may be some background noise when I'm telling the story. This is because there are so many fans going. There's no air conditioner in this room and it is extremely humid outside right now, so just try to bear with me. Anyways, let's jump into it. When I was 16, I went on a camping trip to the Colorado River near Blythe. We didn't use the government campsite. We decided to camp out back in the Three Fingers Lake area, which is just a series of backwaters and canals. So we arrived there in mid-afternoon. It was mid-September and the sun was still blazing. We found a spot that was a little bit secluded. The tents got set up. My brother and I proceeded to go out in search of wood from the nearby willow trees. While collecting wood, I came across a series of hoof prints in the mud, as well as marks of something either sleeping there or at least bedding down in the spot from time to time. I made the assumption that it was a deer or something. I say this because on previous river trips I had seen the same thing along the river. So we got a small fire going while we still had light. We set out a few fishing poles to try our luck while my uncle started up dinner. It was while the dinner was cooking that I thought I heard something go into the far side of the canal further down the stream and come back out on our side. This was something big. I turned to my brother. He didn't think anything of it. My dad thought that it might be just a fat beaver. So after some more time, dinner was cooked. We ate and then we set up to go get some night fishing in. All four of us, my dad, my brother, my uncle, and I, were focused intently upon our rods. I kept having this strange feeling that we were being watched by someone. My uncle, though, reassured me that I was just creeping myself out. At around midnight, we all decided to retire. We threw a few more logs onto the fire to keep some coals going, and then climbed into our tents. I decided to sleep in my own tent since I had one. My dad had set up this really huge 6-man tent so the three of them could share that. I had set my tent up on a nice flat and sandy section of dirt. There were no rocks underneath me. I had foam padding and 2 sleeping bags underneath me, so I was pretty comfy. As I started to drift off to sleep, though, I heard something crossing the canal again. Everyone else was passed out hard. I could hear them snoring loudly. Already wary, I flipped over to my stomach and I looked out into the dark through the little mesh opening on my tent. All I could see was some dark shape emerge from the slope of the bank. It wandered on the edge of the light. I could hear it sniffing around. A sound of hooves on the ground made me think that it was a deer, but then its shape came just within sight to make out a form against the dark sky. It was on 2 legs. I scrunched down into my tent and stopped moving. My mind raced, trying to decide on what I saw and what I was hearing. I convinced myself that it was just a deer sniffing around and that maybe I was just confused, and the sounds of the thing faded away eventually after what seemed like hours. I laid there, straining to hear any more noise at all. All I could hear was the sound of insects and the occasional bullfrog. I was finally able to get some sleep. I was awoken after dawn. Breakfast was already made. Coffee and soda were waiting, whatever I wanted. I stumbled out, ate my breakfast, and started asking everyone if they had heard anything last night. None of them had. After changing, and while the heat was still at bay, I walked over to where I had seen the creature. Numerous hoof marks littered the dirt. I followed them over to where we had found all the wood. There was clear signs that something had returned to the spot the soil had been turned up. I walked back to the campsite, trying to think nothing of it. We spent the day swimming in the canal. Something in the back of my mind just kept telling me that whatever I saw last night was still around and still watching me and watching us. That evening, it was my turn to cook. I set up some burgers to cook over the fire while everyone else was going about their business. As I was about to pull the burgers off the fire when my dad came running from the willow patch. He started saying there's some weird shit going on back there. I put the burgers aside and we all followed him. Further back in the willow trees, there was what looked like some sort of altar. It was constructed out of river stones, and on it had a half-eaten fish and all sorts of smashed bones lie around it. There were little reed-tied shapes that sat around it. They looked like voodoo dolls made from twigs. We all made our way out, talking about how creeped out we were and just how weird this thing was. My dad and my uncle agreed that it was probably some pagan altar or something, because it was hidden. They both agreed that tonight would be the last night that we stayed. That night, we kept the fire big until we went to bed. I kept eyeing the way to the willow patch. As I laid there, I heard the thing cross the canal once again. I could hear the hooves once more. It circled to the far side of the camp. Once it got to the willow trees, I lost track of it. I strained to hear anything for a long time. I was certain that the others were doing the same. Then, we heard the most horrible sound erupt from the grove. It was a scream, but like something being murdered, like someone being murdered, but it had a braying quality to it. I was terrified. I clutched my camp shovel, knowing that something was out there. I heard movement from the other tent. From the tent, I heard my dad and uncle emerge. I heard my dad tell my brother to stay in the tent. They both went to the car. I heard my dad talking about getting their guns, just in case. My father and his brother always brought pistols with them when we went camping. You never know what kind of animal or crazy person might show up. They both walked off into the dark toward the willow trees. Things were deadly silent. No insects, nothing but a breeze. I heard 2 gunshots, followed by another horrible gargled scream. I heard the 2 running full speed back to the camp. They started screaming at us to get into the car. My brother and I came out of the tents. My dad screamed at us, "Get in the effing car now, get in the car." They both had their pistols in hand and headed straight for the car. We all got in. He started it and began hauling ass down the dirt road. He started saying that they saw something back in there. My uncle was white as a sheet. He told us that we'll go back for our stuff in the morning. My dad didn't stop until we reached Blythe. He got on his cell phone and called the police. The police initially thought that my father had shot a homeless man camped out by the river. We headed back in, but by the time that we returned to the campsite, it was dawn. The tents were torn down. Everything was tossed about. Our fishing rods were snapped. Our camp table was in several places and scattered about. The police searched the area. They found the altar and told us that we most likely shot at some teenagers who were doing their weird devil worshipping. There was no blood, but those hoof prints were everywhere. The police told us to clean everything up and that we should leave. We cleaned the site up, gathering the now mostly ruined gear. As I rolled up my tent, I felt something hit my back. I looked down to see one of the wooden figures from the altar in the willows. I looked around in time to see something recede into the reeds, followed by the splashing in the canal. I finished packing everything up, and we left. We haven't gone back since then. My dad, brother, and uncle still talk about it, and we all refused to return to camp near Blythe since then. None of the names that I'm going to use here are real, but the people definitely are. When I was working on my master's, I landed a job working part-time at a paper. It was a small-time outlet, and I mainly applied because I enjoyed writing, and it was a pretty easy part-time job, not because I was serious about becoming any journalist. However, the boss man went ahead and saddled me with a, quote, big feature article covering the poorest neighborhood in the city. I was extremely green, but my boss told me that my writing style would suit the subject matter. So I'm scheduled to meet up with this guy, Reverend Downey. His job is to explain a bit of the neighborhood's history to me, as well as introduce me to a few interesting locals. So one morning, I meet up with him in his office in the neighborhood church. Reverend Downey actually turns out to be hilarious. He tells me all about the neighborhood, mixing in bits of history with funny anecdotes. All of this is great stuff for me in my article. As he walks, I'm taking notes when I hear a crowd gathering outside. He tells me that it's the weekly food pantry setting up inside the church. He also mentions the needle ladies showing up. I ask, the needle ladies? What are they? He said it's a group of women who set up a needle exchange on the church grounds. Drug addicts show up, tell them how many needles they use daily, and the women give them fresh needles for a week and then take their used ones. The Reverend excuses himself to go check up on things. Meanwhile, I get up to stretch my legs. I step out of the office, where a crowd of women and children bustled about. They're picking out some canned items that are spread out over a few different tables. Through a doorway on the far side, I can see out into the courtyard where the Reverend is talking to the needle ladies as they set up tables. I'm watching the dead-eyed druggies waiting in line when I feel a tug on my shirt. I turn around. There's a little boy looking up at me, a giant smile on his face. "They got a nothing man buried outside," he says. At first I thought he said a muffin man. "Excuse me?" I ask. "A nothing man," he repeats. "I can see everything from my window. They made it inside. Then they took him outside and buried him." He points behind me and says, "Right there." I turn around to see Reverend Downey walking back inside. He says in his big warm voice, "Come on out. I want you to meet someone very special." I turn around to say goodbye to the little kid, but he's gone. I'm introduced to Grandma Kane, who is raising 4 grandchildren all by herself. Reverend Downey gets a look on his face and tells me that the children all have AIDS. Grandma Kane and the 4 children live in a tiny room rundown apartment. It's a building just down the street. So, I end up walking back there with them to do a mini interview with her. I'm not lying when I say that the apartment building that they live in is absolute shit. The elevators don't work, parts of the ceiling are missing, there's holes in the walls exposing the wiring beneath. There's also no air conditioner, and it's the height of summer, so we're boiling as I'm interviewing frail Grandma Kane next to an open window. They don't all have AIDS, she says of the children. Just 3 do, 1 don't. Apparently their mother was a heroin junkie who spent most of her life in and out of jail. She basically hoarded herself out for drug money non-stop, so all the kids have different fathers. The mom eventually went away to prison for good, and the kids went to grandma. What about the 4th child, the one that doesn't have AIDS? That's the oldest, Grandma Kane tells me, Martha. She claims that Martha was not born with AIDS, and that she's been tested, a very rare thing in that neighborhood. She also claims that Martha was raped when she was 9 years old. She didn't get AIDS then either, luckily, but that event traumatized her. Overnight, it was like a switch flipped in the poor girl's head. Martha started spending all of her time running around the neighborhood with drug dealers and criminals. She's only 13 and has had 2 abortions already. I asked Grandma Kane if she knows who raped Martha, but she refuses to tell me. I'm kind of surprised because she's been so forthcoming up until this point. I assume that she's afraid of someone. Was it one of the drug dealers? I ask. No, she says. So then, was it somebody in the neighborhood? One of the neighborhood boys, I say. Or maybe just some guy, maybe. No, it wasn't one of them. She seems to be getting more and more nervous as I ask her about it. Then she says something that leaves me puzzled. Everyone knows about the criminals and the drug dealers, but nobody knows the truth about the ghetto. I asked her, what's the truth about the ghetto? She seems exasperated now, and finally says, it's just, there's worse things out there than drug dealers. I press her, what things? She looks me dead in the eye and makes a motion like she's zipping her lips closed. My curiosity is piqued by this point, so I tell her that we can do things off the record, which is something I always wanted to say during an interview. If she wants, then we can do that. So I turn off my recorder. She's fidgeting now, staring out the window. Before, she seemed nervous, but now she's scared. I say, "Is somebody threatening to keep you quiet? I can help you." She shakes her head. I ask, "Who are you afraid of?" And then she snaps, "It's not a who, boy." Instantly, her body relaxes and her eyes seem to glaze over. She turns and looks out the window. At first, I think that she's just ignoring me, but then I notice that she's not breathing. Her chest isn't moving. I'll cut to the chase and say that she died right there. The grandkids were screaming and crying and crowding around her. I call 911. Nobody shows up for an hour, and I call again. This time I tell them that I'm a reporter man and a woman is dead. The dispatcher says that the police will be right over, and they are. 2 squad cars though. No ambulance. And then it hits me. No one is even coming to remove Grandma Kane's body. After a short chat with the police where I explained what happened and that I was interviewing her, and then she passed away, they tell me to leave the premises immediately, and they assure me that somebody will deal with the body. Then they put the kids in the back of the car. I ask, where are the kids going to be taken to? One of the officers says, probably the prison. They have a child care facility there. And he wasn't joking either. By this point, it's almost dark, and I need to get home. I make the walk back to my car, and I'm passing the church courtyard when I hear a familiar voice. "You want to see where they put it?" I turn around, and it's the same kid from earlier, that big goofy smile on his face and all. After the shit that I just went through, his silly grin kinda catches me off guard, and I find myself chuckling a little. "They put something on top of the nothing man's grave," he tells me. "You can see it poking out like a belly button." He points toward the churchyard. Don't ask me why, but I walk over and begin to inspect the churchyard. I know that the kid is probably just telling stories, but I guess partly I'm on autopilot, still processing the events of the afternoon. Then, after a minute, I find a round patch of dirt that looks like it's been recently dug up, and in the center is something that kinda sparkles in the low moonlight. I reach toward it. Then, I pull my hand back. Squeezed into a little grove in the dirt, right in the center, is the freshly dug dirt, is a human eye, staring straight up at me. I almost gag, and I step back. Then, I hear a familiar voice. "Did you find something?" It's Reverend Downey. He's leaning in the doorway of the church, almost completely hidden by the shadows. For a moment, I'm at a loss for words. Then I point down at my feet. "Have you seen this?" He doesn't respond. He just says, "I kept an eye on your car for you." Before I can respond, he says, "You gotta keep an eye on things around here," he said, "or they disappear." He's not smiling now, and there's no warmth in his voice like before during our interview. "Things go missing around here all the time," he tells me. "Cars, people, and the cops don't even bother investigating." I get myself collected, and I ask, "Is somebody buried here?" Reverend Downey steps out of the shadows and says, "I heard about Grandma Kane." There's an odd expression on his face. It finally dawns on me that I'm being threatened. "If I weren't a reverend, and I might bet you never find what killed her." He said this and then paused for a second, and I'd win that bet. "Who the hell is buried here, Reverend?" I ask. "It's not a who," he says. "It's a what." I begin to feel severely nauseous and then dizzy, and you're going to find out just what that is if you don't step back. He reaches for my hand from that damn grave. He grabs my hand and yanks me back away from the ring of recently dug dirt and from the eye in the ground, and I instantly feel better. I noticed then that the Reverend is sweating heavily. His hand is on his chest, his fingers searching for his crucifix. He tells me to get on home now, and I hear a strange sound, an odd humming that seems to be coming from beneath the ground. I don't even think twice. I scramble to my car, I fire the ignition, and I peel out away from the church and out of the neighborhood. As I'm driving, I pass Grandma Kane's apartment building. I glance up at her small window, and I can still see her body sitting up in the chair. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination, or the shadows, or the fear, but it looked like that she was missing an eye. Needless to say, these events shook me to my core. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do about the article. In the end, I wound up taking the easy route and writing a feature piece like I was asked to do, focusing on the emotional struggles of living in a ghetto, ignoring all of the truly disturbing things that I had seen. I spoke to a local poet and some recovering addicts to build my piece, but I steered clear of the church and of Reverend Downey. At some point, though, I couldn't help but bring up something to the poet that I was interviewing. He was a very knowledgeable historian of the neighborhood, and I asked him if he had ever heard something called the Nothing Man. His reaction left me wondering. There was a flash of recognition in his eyes, but he insisted, I only know it by name. He knew it was an old urban folktale, popular in the neighborhood long before he had been born, and that it was now largely forgotten. It's something you might have heard kids talking about during the Depression, a spooky story to scare each other, but beyond that, I have no earthly idea what the Nothing Man is. So, what did you think of those stories? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have any of your own stories? If you want to send them in, there's an email in the description that you can do so. And I have links in the description like a Patreon and a PayPal if you want to donate to the channel. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and I will see you in the next one. I hope your days get better and that the world gets better. And yeah, thank you for watching.